So hello and welcome to the Poe-Cast. I'm Benjamin.
And I am Christopher.
And today we're going to be talking about, well, two subjects, but I think we're going to open with fairies because I know Christopher's been wanting to discuss this quite a bit,
Yes.
for quite a bit.
Yes.
So since you are the fairy scholar of the two of us, I'm looking at my notes right now. I literally have four names and one tiny little phrase on fairies, and I think you carried down like four books
um,
considering the
three
subject.
and about four web pages.
So, do we want to start with a little bit of history of fairies, or maybe just like we'll start with the history of fairies, and then we can start going like with, I don't want to call them pop culture fairies, but fairies that people might know, character-wise and such.
Um, sure. Fairies and spirits and just otherworldly beings have always existed in different mythologies. You could possibly, if you wanted to go to, say, Japanese or Oriental or Arabian, Middle Eastern, or African myths, you do encounter spirit beings, just like in Native American literature, which I know very little about. Not literature is not the right word. Native American myths and legends, they show up. Um, but what we really know the fairies from is from the European medieval mythos.
And and from what you've told me before, they're not quite what most people would think. Like whenever you think of a
No.
fairy, I'm gonna throw out a popular name here. You think of Navi. Hey, listen, the little glowing orb with wings, which is more of a sprite than an actual fairy, right?
Sure. I mean, in terms of the Fae and the Fae folk, they aren't necessarily limited to one form. But if you really wanted to, say, get a big description of the fairies, and I apologize if I sneeze at some point.
Oh no, it's fine.
I'm going to read a bit out of J.R.R. Tolkien's Smith of Wootton Major, or as we sometimes call it, Swooth. Don't ask why. It's a in-joke. Swooth. He stood beside the sea of windless storm, where the blue waves like snow-clad hills roll silently out of the unlight to the long strand, bearing the white ships that return from battles on the dark marches of which men know nothing. He saw a great ship cast high upon the land, and the waters fell back in foam without sound. And the elven mariners were tall and terrible. Their swords shone, and their spears glinted, and a piercing light was in their eyes. Suddenly they lifted up their voices in a song of triumph, and his heart was shaken with fear, and he fell upon his face, and they passed over him, and went away into the echoing hills.
So random question.
Yes.
Could the Eldar theoretically be considered? I mean, to kind of explain the Eldar, they're kind of the creators of the. They're kind of the. I don't want to call them. Well, yeah, I can call them gods of Middle Earth. Would I be correct in
The
saying that kind of?
Eldar? No, 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 no,
Yeah.
no. The Eldar is the elven word for the elves. You are thinking
Okay.
of the Valar and the
Valar.
Maiar and the Ainur.
Okay.
Um,
Now, couldn't the Valar be considered fairies esque?
Technically,
Technically.
but actually, the Valar are more godlike, and actually,
Okay.
Tolkien's elves. In his original concept, he originally called them fairies. To read you a bit from The Hobbit, the
Wow,
feasting
we're
people,
really heavy. We're really heavy on the reading this podcast.
well, it helps. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. They are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the West, and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to Faerie in the west. There, the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages, and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things. Before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight, and after the coming of men, they took ever more and more into the gloaming and the dusk. Still, elves they were and remain, and that is good people. But notice the interesting phrase that the wood elves are elves which had never gone to fairy in the West. And the interesting thing about the word fairy is that it can both refer to the people, the fae folk, or it can also refer to fairyland.
Now, in my experience, fairies haven't been really considered, I don't want to say good people, more of a chaotic neutral. They like mischief.
They are a perilous folk. I mean, remember that Boromir and even Treebeard warns the Fellowship against going to Lothlorien. That in Lothlorien it is a perilous place, but as I believe Aragorn describes that, yes, it is perilous, but so too are you, Legolas and Gimli, fraught with perils.
True, 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 true. I mean, I'm going to be in an RPG. I think I've talked about it before. The RPG with Cairn, the dwarf monk, and apparently, in our campaign for the RPG is going to take place in a pretty much the kingdom of the fairies, which is going to be interesting, especially with how Christopher has explained fairies to me in the past, like the fairy squire in one of the King Arthur tales. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I just remember just Christopher was describing it to me, and apparently there was the small boy, and I don't remember it. Who was it? Galahad? Not Galahad.
I'm which what are you talking about?
The one where I think maybe he was fighting the Green Knight, and then pretty much he dropped his lance, and then the fairy squire just went
Sir
flying
Lonval.
across the. Yeah, he
Sir
just like
Lonval. You want me to tell the story of Sir
pretty much
Lonval?
did the flash and sprinted in the blink of an eye, grabbed the lance, threw it back to the knight. Knight gets it, charges the guy again, drops it again. Fairy squire gets it again, and they do that like 8 times, and then eventually he's just riding on the back of the horse with the knight, fixing his armor as it's falling apart.
Yeah, so to tell that story, Sir Lonval meets a fairy, and she basically has fallen in love with him. He is sort of dishonored and has left Camelot, and he meets this fairy, and she takes him in and offers her love to Sir Lonval, on the condition, of course, that he keep her existence a secret. Anyway, but she gives him several other gifts, most notably the invisible fairy squire Jifra.
Now you did say he was invisible.
Well, I forgot the invisible part.
That's very important, and that makes it even cooler
That
and
makes it
slash
even
creepier.
cooler.
When you
Yes.
picture this knight who drops his lance, and all of a sudden the lance just jumps off of the ground and lands back in his hand. If I
Yeah.
was fighting the knight, I would just say truce right there. No, done. Surrender.
So anyway, well, Sir Launval has been challenged by another knight. And so he comes and as knights do, they have their duels, which basically are like tournaments, but a little bit more serious.
Mm-hmm.
So they're charging at each other, and Sir Valentine strikes at Sir Launval, and Sir Launval loses his shield. And Jifra sees it, dashes out, grabs the shield, jumps in midair, and while Sir Launval is still galloping on, and buckles the shield back on to Sir Lawnval as he's charging.
Sir, what's his face?
Sir Lawnval. So the fairy charges out, grabs the shield before it hits the ground, spins around, buckles it back on and he's jumping at this point. He's just jumping, buckling the shield back on, and then leaps back down, and Sir Lawnval keeps charging. And it's just so epic. And another time, Sir Valentine hits Sir Lawnval in the head, and his helmet comes flying off. But J.R.R. jumps and grabs the helmet and lands on the back of the horse and buckles the helmet back on and then flips back off. It's absolutely epic.
Awesome.
And I probably have gotten those in opposite order. But the first time J.R.R. it happens twice. And J.R.R. the first time was like, oh goodness, and he's just like that second late, but he still does the awesome thing. And then the next time he was ready, and he was like totally like grabs the shield and jumps and is like totally like buckling it on in midair and then jumps away. And it's so awesome. Let's talk about more modern fairies because, like I've said, Tolkien's elves are very close to the medieval concept of fairies, and specifically, I liken them very close to the Irish mythos. Which, if you want to know what fairies are, go read the Irish myths, specifically about the Tuatha De Danann.
I'll say
These
that's what our DM is basing. Well, I guess he's not basing it off. I guess he's just taking it because he said it's going to be a lot of Celtic based or
yeah.
Celtic, same thing.
Celtic. No, it's not. We're not talking about the sports team from Boston. We're talking about the ancient Celts.
Irish, yeah, basically, yeah.
Which the Celts basically consist of everything in England, and the Irish are really from Ireland. The Tuatha. But the Tuatha originally invaded and conquered the Isle of Éireann, which is the original name for Ireland. I believe they still call it Éire or Éireann.
Yeah.
So the Tuatha De Danann invaded and conquered, and they have all these, and they're not always necessarily the tall Legolas. You know, there is some kind of boisterous. Think like Santa, Brian Blessed, and Gimli all put together.
Have you seen the picture someone made of Tauriel, Legolas, and Azog in the original Hobbit cartoon form? Your eyes just got really
What?
big. It is hilarious. Especially because Azog's hand is a shovel.
I don't know if I can handle this.
Oh,
I don't know if I can handle this.
it's hilarious because you see this old Yoda elf thing and it says Legolas, and then you see this other old Yoda elf thing and it's Tauriel, and you see this big fat white orc with horns and tusks, the frog face, the giant mouth,
Where
and
did
he's
you
got a
see
shovel on his.
this?
Someone showed it to me, and you mentioning they don't look like your normal. And I was like, oh, I wonder if you've seen that. It always hilarious. Oh, we'll have to post it on the page because it is so stinking funny. Hey, Christopher, guess what time it is? You're being squeaked.
Stop, Benjamin. Benjamin, don't squig me. Just don't squig.
Look at its
You're
giant
squigging
mouth.
me on top of me, staring at at a gray elf
Don't make fun of
Tauriel
Slurpee.
Legolas.
He's giving you loving squig kisses.
Just don't squig me. Don't squig me.
So, I found a very funny orc story. Um, I'm not calling it by its true title. The true title is The Wog That Would Never Be. The the title I made up for it is called The Tale of Two Wogs. So essentially, the story begins, and there was a wog going on by war boss Gorgob or something like that, and he came across another war boss in his army, the war boss Thragska or something like that, and they both decided, hey, since we're both wogging, why don't we wog together? But then an argument started over what the wog's name should be called. Naturally, Gorbag wanted it to be named after him, and Throgskar, I'm completely making up names now because I can't remember what I said earlier, wanted it to be after him. So the only orky thing to do was to fight it out. So they dueled for 3 whole days, nonstop. And by the time they got done, and during all this fighting and bloodshed amongst themselves, they didn't hear the screams of agony and cries for mercy coming from their armies. By the time the two, they pretty much ended up with a stalemate. They're like, okay, we'll just call it Wog, Gorbag, and Thrasgal. They turn around, their entire armies had been completely assassinated.
Oh.
Both armies completely wiped out, and they don't know what happened because they were pretty much. So they both go, well, this isn't going to work, and they head back to their homelands to not Wog.
So I mentioned it before. But the idea of fairyland, the land of the fairies, is very central to what fairies are, because often medieval knights would stumble into fairyland, and they go out into the wilderness, and they cross over this invisible barrier and are suddenly in the land of fairy. So it's very much a. What are you laughing at?
Do you remember that story about the knight that we made up in your world? Okay, recap. Christopher originally had the world of Amir, which was a magical land as normal, and then it took the new direction. And we jokingly said that Fairyland was where all his magical stuff was banished to.
Oh dear.
And there was a crazy old character that I goofed around with, and Christopher banished him. And I was like, oh, he'll be running around your world complaining about how fairies are still real and dragons and stuff, and Christopher banished him to Fairyland. And he is guarded night and day to not escape from Fairyland, to reveal that everything still exists to the actual world. So pretty much you have this glorious court, everyone's enjoying the finest food you could ever have, and you see this old cranky knight in rusty armor. He refuses to remove his armor. He just sits there and complains and refuses to touch his food. I don't want to go out. Yeah, that stupid fairy. Blah, blah, blah. And he'll like occasionally sneak away. All hinges of his armor creaking and grinding. And then he gets to the gate, getting ready to cross the barrier. All of a sudden, in a flash, he's back in his bedchambers because the unicorn the talking unicorn, which is sent to guard him, has snitched on him, and the fairy guards whisk him back to his chambers before he can escape. But he makes like 20 escape attempts a day. It's ridiculous. One of these days, he's gonna break out, and it's gonna be hilarious because you see this old crazy knight like Pellinor in the Camelot musical, complaining. He's like, those dragons are still real. There's still fairies everywhere. There's a talking unicorn. His name's George. He was torturing me, making sure I didn't escape. But that makes me laugh whenever I stop and think about it. And you were just like, you started talking about the boundaries again. I was like, oh, yep, there's our old Pelly.
But yeah, fairyland is very kind of central because it's the land of where magic and things may not always be as they seem. Very much Mirkwood in The Hobbit. If you think about it as they are crossing into fairyland, you kind of get a very fun new perspective on it. Should we just wrap this up and save dragons for our next podcast?
Maybe we should.
Yeah.
We can do that. I'm Benjamin.
And I'm Christopher.
And this is the Poe-Cast.
And we're calling that done. Good night.
Good night.